The Digital Services Bill 2023 is a weighty piece of legislation, as bills giving effect to EU regulations often are. It covers quite a lot of ground, containing a mixed bag of provisions, from consumer protection and the regulation of advertising algorithms to content moderation and the combating of child sex abuse material, some of which are obviously deserving of our full support, but others of which have the capacity to give rise to grave concerns. The stated goal of the European Commission's Digital Services Act is to ensure greater harmonisation of the conditions affecting the provision of intermediary digital services in the particular online platforms that host content shared by their customers. And before I get into the subject of content moderation, I want to briefly mention pornography. I don't think that we should be letting children watch pornography. There have been too many studies showing the ill effects of it, mentally and socially. The past 2 years have seen a slew of reports on the increase in the numbers of teenagers who have reported being sexually assaulted when socialising with other teens, and this has been directly linked to the consumption of often violent and extreme pornography. In its annual report, the voluntary organisation Children at Risk in Ireland said that there had been a significant increase of 36% in the number of children being referred to them for sexual harmful behaviour. We are standing idly by while our young men and women are being hurt and damaged by this. Multiple states over in the USA have introduced measures blocking pornography for minors, as has our closest neighbour in the UK. Multiple phone companies have begun blocking pornography sites as default on their phones. So I strongly believe that the House of the Oireachtas should be examining steps in this direction as well. With regard to the Digital Services Bill, I have concerns regarding some aspects of its content moderation regime, particularly when it comes to curbing certain so-called forms or categories of speech, while leaving these categories undefined. Under the Digital Services Act, the European Commission may apply significant pressures upon digital platforms to curb hate speech, disinformation or threats to civic discourse, a measure which, on the face of it, should have the full support of all decent and civic-minded folk. However, as recent months in Ireland have proven, these terms constitute what research fellow David Thunder calls notorious, vague and slippery categories, utterances which are dismissed as far-right dog whistles, one day often seem to be government ministers' talking points a few months down the line, as the establishment catches up with the opinions of the public. Imagine if such speech was illegal. The man in the pub could be prosecuted for saying the same thing as a cabinet minister, his only mistake being that he had said it before the government changed his mind. And so, by their nature, anti-free speech laws become merely a large stick wielded by the state that can be used to enforce its own ideas of what is true. The DSA creates entities called trusted flaggers to report illegal content they identify on large online platforms. Online platforms are required by the Act to respond promptly to reports of illegal content provided by these trusted flaggers, nominated by Member States' appointed digital service coordinators. The Act requires large online platforms to take the necessary measures to enforce that notices submitted by the trusted flaggers acting within their designated area of expertise through the notice and action mechanism required by this regulation are treated with priority. These platforms will face periodic audits for their actions compliance with the Act by auditors working on behalf of the European Commission. The Commission, if it's deemed that a large online platform such as X has not been in compliance with the DSA, may fine the said platform up to 6% of its gross annual global turnover. But here's the kicker. Because the idea of non-compliance is hard to quantify, platforms will not know the threshold until it is established through precedent, i.e. what exactly is required to meet due diligence obligations of systemic risk management. It seems likely that companies that wish to avoid legal and financial headaches will prefer to err on the side of caution and put on a show of compliance to avoid getting fined. In this sense, is exactly like the hate speech bill by design. No one will know where the line in the sand lies, and so all will be forced to self-police and self-censor. The legislation is not intended to be enforced by the guards or the courts, but by fear. This Act will create an atmosphere of legal uncertainty, both on online platforms and for their users. It heavily incentivises online platforms to police speech in a manner that aligns with the EU Commission around vague categories like disinformation and hate speech, and this will obviously have repercussions for the free speech of users. The net effect of the Act is to apply an almost irresistible pressure on social media platforms to play the counter-disinformation game in a way that will earn them a passing grade with the Commission's auditors and thus avoid getting hit with hefty fines. Minister, at the 17th of February, we need to rock up to the EU to rubber stamp this legislation. That means that 4 stages need to go through this House. This just reminds me of the hate speech bill. Very little scrutiny went through in the Dáil in relation to that bill. It came in here, and only for senators who are diligent and awake, we have stalled that piece of legislation for now. And I feel the same thing is going to happen with this piece of legislation. Rushing this through is not the way forward. We need time on this. We're not back here until next Wednesday. So we'll get maybe one day next week and the week after, and that's it. It's gone through. That's not how we should do business in this House. It's not giving enough time to this piece of legislation. So I don't agree with enforcing the online spaces, which are town squares of the world, to abide by the EU's particular vision of reality. So I will be voting against this bill.